attitude towards the negotiation, win-lose versus win-win, right? Now, in the West, we've had Fisher and Urey from back in the 60s and 70s saying how the best way to negotiate is to look for a win-win situation. Both parties come out ahead, right? Other parts of the world don't adhere to that. And the Chinese are particularly noted for a win-lose attitude. In other words, one party comes out a bit better than the other, all right? So it becomes a bit of a competition. Now, if you're aware of that, and of course this is something common with all bargaining societies, then you can actually operate appropriately within that environment. The personal style, the formal versus informal. In China, it's appropriate to turn up to your negotiations or any business meeting really with the suit and tie on, yeah? To call people by their honour, Mr. this, Mr. that. You don't actually become too friendly too soon, if you like, as many people in Australia and other parts of the world. There is a formality to it that has to be adhered to until you become really close, yeah? We've talked about the direct versus the indirect communication, and this can be quite an issue. Time sensitivity, high versus low. The Chinese negotiations, along with the Japanese and quite a few other Asians, are renowned for having long-term negotiations. Much, much longer than what we would think normal here. Many people will talk to you about a negotiation or deals that would take 2 or 3 days here will take 2 or 3 weeks in a place like China. Yeah, and you need to be prepared for that. And you can actually make them more efficient if you understand why. And a lot of it is because they're actually trying to find out everything they possibly can about you and make a judgment on whether you're an honourable person to do business with. And if we get time, I'll talk about that later, but there's other people here that will be dealing with that as well. The issue of emotionalism, high versus low. In most cases, it's not considered appropriate to become overly emotional in a Chinese society. Having said that, I've seen it many times where the Chinese themselves have become quite animated, yeah? Particularly over iron ore prices back in 2009. Unbelievable how emotional they got in front, and I was quite surprised, to tell you the truth. The form of the agreement, specific versus general, right? So the contract itself. Chinese have a strong preference for a general agreement because they believe that you can actually work out the details later, right? The contract is not the start, okay? It's the beginning of the start. So when they have a contract, you'll have a big celebration over it, but that contract is expected to be changeable. They expect you to be flexible and vice versa. Team organisation, one leader versus a consensus attitude. In general, we will have one team leader, yeah? In China, it will be different because there's a number of other players that have an interest in what you're negotiating, what you're actually involved in. So there'll be maybe government officials involved who you may not even know is in the room or it has to be consulted, yeah? The government has a huge impact on what goes on. The high initial starting price, right? Please expect this. I've done research with a number of companies who didn't realise that the initial price put forward by the Chinese wasn't the final price. And they've knocked back stuff, expecting that there was no negotiating to go on there. Bargaining cultures, doesn't matter if it's China, India, a number of other countries, will not put forward their first price. 9 times out of 10, they're actually expecting to have a negotiation around the price. Concessions, normally at the end of negotiations within a Chinese environment. In a Western environment, quite often we give little concessions at the start, all right? And they're like wondering, why would you do that? Right? Wait towards the end to sell it, to get the deal done. So these are frameworks to think about of differences between Australians and Chinese. This here, guanxi, all right? Very, very important part of doing business in China, probably the most important, and we'll get some more reinforcement of this a bit later. Relationships, personal networks of influence. This is the way you get things done in the Chinese environment. You can't get things done without it. You cannot get things done without it. It's used as a way of dealing with weak legal and regulatory institutions, which is fairly obvious if you understand the history. What isn't obvious, that this is an asset. this is the view that we need to realise, right? This is actually an asset, and every asset needs to be developed, but it needs to be maintained, right? So you develop it through socialising, trust-building activities. Now, a lot of that trust-building activities, it's a bit of euphemism for providing favours, yeah? And the Chinese mind has a little mental notebook about all the favours that they've provided, like a bank book, you know, in their head, and all the favours that have been provided to them. And they will not forget them. They'll come to you 5, 10 years later and say, I remember I did this for you. Actually, I need a bit of help with this, that and the other, all right? This is a part of the society that really needs to be in the forefront of your mind. Now we have an example here of a US real estate deal. There's a contract signed. This was on the interior of China. I won't go through the big details. But the Americans got the contract, went back to America and had no contact with this company for 9 months. When they went back, they found the property that they'd actually thought they'd bought was gone. And the guy said, but we had a contract. And the Chinese guy says, well, but you haven't contacted us. We didn't think you were real, so we sold it to someone else. All right? So the idea of reinforcing this relationship, this guanxi, is really, really important. I can give you an example of it working the other way around as well. About 3 years ago, I was in Jinan in Shandong province, and I was with a winery actually from McLaren, and they'd sold a container full of wine to this particular Chinese gentleman who was really half government, half entrepreneur, as is the norm in much of China. They went through the big banquet, the big dinners, the celebration of the arrangement, and the wine was flowing pretty freely. And this guy had brought a whole range of other government officials, other business people, friends over to this celebration. Anyway, to cut a long story short, by the end of this meal, and it was a pretty typical Chinese banquet sort of boozy meal, he sold another container of the same wine to different buyers, people who had rocked up, he hadn't even met before, and he actually doubled his sales just by playing the game, if you like. Okay, so some of the things in developing it: avoid ethnocentrism, right? What you really need to understand is that Chinese culture and traditions have been around for a couple of thousand years. We're new kids off the block, and our particular way of viewing the world is only one way of viewing the world. It's very important to show a lot of respect, but not subservience to the people and what you find over there. It's a matter of not judging, you know, ours is better than theirs or theirs is better. It's a matter of accepting it's different, and that's the way it is. Things like this, basic things, picking up from the airport, would you do that, right? In all the times I've been to China, I don't know how many dozens of times now, except when I was a backpacker, I've always been picked up from the airport every single time by someone and driven to the location. They look after you, all right? Now, it may not be, you know, someone high up or whatever, someone they've paid, and it's a lot cheaper to do that in China. But it's an expectation, of course, when they come over here, that you'll do the same for them. You know, don't just say get a taxi to your local hotel. If you can't be there, organise something for them, depending on how important the relationship is to you. Small gifts and favours the norm. All right, we're not talking about bribery here, but small, iconic things that actually relate to the experience of being here go down very well. It's a way of cementing the fact that you think these people are important to you. Banquets, I can't stress the importance of this. Sharing food is so important in society, in Chinese society, much, much stronger than here. And everyone is an expert on the food. They can tell you stuff that, you know, I tasted too and can't tell the difference between them, right? It's very, very important within Chinese society, and you have to engage. You know, you really are not going to go too far if you say, no, sorry, I'm not going to eat any of that food. It doesn't mean to say you have to eat scorpions or whatever, although they take the tails off the scorpions anyway, I can tell you. And half the time it's deep fried. You can't taste the difference. But you have to engage in this. And you can explain, look, I can't eat certain foods for health reasons, whatever it may be, even though you're fit as a bull. But you really do have to engage. This word here, gambay, any of you doing business over there be very familiar with this. This is the drinking term, you know, bottoms up. But you really need to use this for offering toasts to guests. This is a standard expectation. You'll be sitting around the table and they will stand up and make a toast to the relationship. And there's an expectation that you'll do the same, right? And the drinking games that go with it are a part of this.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Where it says who pays, am I assuming that when it's in China, they pay?
Sorry, yes. Once again, I've never had to pay for a meal in all the time I've been in China, except when I'm out alone.
What about when you're out here?
Well, this is it. I mean, there would be an expectation, wouldn't there, of reciprocation, yeah? Remember we talked earlier about the issue of this sort of favours and notebook, right? Now, if they're doing all the stuff for you when you're over there, then obviously there's an expectation, yeah? Going back to that face issue though. When you're actually in a restaurant situation and you're actually toasting, that's a big opportunity to actually provide face to your potential partners or partners as they are. It's an issue of amongst all their friends or amongst all their peers, you're actually providing praise to them, right? Which lifts up their level of face. This is a typical sort of small banquet in China. For those that haven't been over there, you can see the food is very laid on. Rarely can you get through everything that's put there. They will always order multiple meals. Even if there's only two of you, you get over there and they'll order half a dozen meals and you go, look, there's no way we'll get through that, right? That's not the issue, it's that you're tasting all these different varieties and there's not a necessity, to get through it all. You can see there's always plenty of alcohol around the table as well. Try and avoid political discussions, sensitive discussions. It's not really wise to go down this area until you know exactly who you're talking to. All right? Many people are members of the party within China. Right? It's a way of getting ahead. Doesn't mean to say that they're strong advocates of the party line, right? But for them, it's a practical way of getting promotions, and it's necessary to actually go in certain places of Chinese society. So it's wise just to actually not go there. Don't be providing criticism. If they want to start, fine. But it's just, even within an Australian environment, it's quite obvious that sometimes it's wise to keep away from those issues. Learn the basics of China's history. Really important to have an understanding, and it's really well received if you have a bit of an understanding of what's gone on in China's history, and there's a lot that's gone on. This is the key one. Show an interest in the people, the firm and the country. Okay, don't just go over there and push your point of view and this, that and the other. Try and learn. The more you learn about all these three areas, the easier it will become to operate. Key point is you're trying to convince them that you are an honourable business person who they can trust and get along with. Really, that's the key point. And they don't have the skills to actually judge from afar whether you are or not. They don't have the internet skills, the connections, and even the cultural skills, the person-to-person skills in general. Not everyone, of course, right? So for them, this is a risk-reducing exercise. So if you know this, then your communication should be all about, we are this sort of person, our company is good, we have a good history. Trying to impact or impart the fact that you are a trustworthy person to deal business with. So reputation here, status, is very important. And that's the sort of questions I'll be asking. They'll be looking to find out what your status is within the industry, within society, and within the company. And they won't ask you directly. Right? These will all be indirect questions, but that's what they're after. Now, what you have to do is make it easy and just give them the information. Yeah? Other considerations. I've talked about the flexibility of contracts. Right? If you're legal eagle and you think, okay, it's in black and white, and if you have a problem, that's what you refer to, then you really shouldn't be going to China. Right? Going back to, or going legally trying to solve disputes is the last thing that the Chinese are comfortable with. They will do a hell of a lot to avoid that. So you need to have a lot of flexibility in how you deal with this issue of contracts.